The Florida sun, a relentless brassy hammer, beat down on Tallahassee. Inside the ornate Capitol building, however, the air conditioning fought a valiant but losing battle against the oppressive heat. For Pam Bondi, the state's attorney general, the stifling atmosphere was more than just meteorological. It was a palpable pressure, a creeping unease that had been building for weeks, manifesting in sleepless nights and a gnawing in her gut. Her office, a testament to power and polish, was usually a sanctuary. Mahogany desk, leather-bound law books, a panoramic view of the city, all the accoutrements of her successful career. Today, however, it felt more like a gilded cage. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz with unspoken anxieties. She tapped a manicured finger against a thick manila folder on her desk. The label was innocuous. Project Nightingale, preliminary findings. But Pam knew what lay within. It was a Pandora's box that had been reluctantly cracked open by her office, and she was beginning to suspect its contents would be a toxic brew. "Anything, Sarah?" Pam's voice was a low, controlled murmur, directed at her chief of staff, Sarah Jenkins, who stood beside her, her own face etched with worry. Sarah shook her head, her usually sharp eyes clouded. "Nothing concrete, AG. Just whispers. Anonymous tips that vanish into the ether the moment we try to pin them down. It's like chasing shadows, but the shadows are getting bolder." Pam leaned back, her gaze drifting to the window. Down below, the city bustled, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in their state's highest legal office. She thought of the two looming Friday deadlines. One was a routine departmental report. The other was a ticking time bomb. A demand for information related to certain individuals and, disturbingly, to the burgeoning legal cannabis industry in Florida. The timing felt less like coincidence and more like calculated pressure. "They know we're looking, don't they?" Pam stated, not as a question, but as a grim certainty. Sarah nodded. "It feels that way. The sources are uncooperative, and there's a strange reticence from some of our usual informants. It's like a wall has gone up." The usual informants were a delicate ecosystem of contacts Pam had cultivated over her years as AG. Law enforcement officers, political operatives, even a few shadowy figures who operated in the gray areas of Florida's less savory industries. They were the eyes and ears that kept her ahead of the curve. But now their silence was deafening. Pam opened the Nightingale folder. Inside were scanned documents, encrypted emails, and heavily redacted financial records. The names that kept surfacing were alarming. Jeffrey Epstein, a name that still sent shivers down the spines of the powerful, a name synonymous with a vile trafficking ring and a trail of broken lives. And then there were the other names: politicians, business moguls, individuals whose influence extended far beyond the Sunshine State. The connection to the cannabis industry was the most bewildering. Florida, a traditionally conservative state, had recently legalized medical marijuana, and the lobbying efforts had been intense, laced with controversy and accusations of backroom deals. What could Epstein, a convicted sex offender with no apparent ties to the legal weed trade, possibly have to do with it? "The financial trails are like a spider web," Pam muttered, tracing a finger over a complex flowchart. "Money moving through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and somehow it's all circling back to a handful of individuals who are now heavily invested in the Florida cannabis market." Sarah cleared her throat. "The Epstein angle is the one that's truly unnerving, AG. I mean, the man is dead, but the people he associated with, they're very much alive and very much in positions of power. And the fact that his name is popping up in relation to these cannabis licenses, it smells rotten, Sarah," Pam finished, her voice hardening. "It smells like corruption so deep it could poison the entire state." She picked up her phone. "I need to speak with Agent Sterling, immediately." Agent Marcus Sterling was an anomaly, a tenacious, almost obsessive FBI agent who had crossed paths with Pam's office on several occasions, usually on the opposite side of an investigation. He was known for his unwavering pursuit of justice, often to the chagrin of those he investigated. But Pam also knew he was incorruptible, a rare commodity in her world. The call connected. Sterling's voice was a low rumble, tinged with weariness. Bondi. To what do I owe the pleasure? Pam didn't bother with pleasantries. Sterling, I need your help. We're looking into something that's sensitive, extremely sensitive. She explained in broad strokes the nature of the Nightingale Project, the financial anomalies, the emerging names, and the bizarre linkage to the cannabis legalization. She omitted the specific Epstein connection, for now. She wanted to gauge his reaction, to see if he had any pre-existing intelligence. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sterling was not a man of many words, but his silences often spoke volumes. Cannabis and anomalies, he finally said, his tone flat. Florida has a lot of anomalies, Attorney General. What makes this one so special? The individuals involved, Sterling, and the sheer scale of the alleged financial manipulation. It's not just about getting rich, it's about controlling a burgeoning industry through illicit means. Another pause, then a subtle shift in Sterling's voice, a flicker of something Pam couldn't quite place. Interest? Recognition? I've heard things, Sterling admitted grudgingly. Rumors about certain individuals looking to smooth the path for their investments in Florida, but nothing concrete, and definitely no mention of names like the ones you're implying. Pam felt a jolt of adrenaline. He knew more than he was letting on. What kind of things, Sterling? What are you hearing? Just whispers, Bondi, the usual cocktail of ambition and desperation. But I'll tell you this, the whispers I've heard have a certain unpleasant resonance, a familiar stench, if you will. The familiar stench, Pam knew exactly what he meant. It was the scent of power, abused, the scent of those who operated above the law, cloaked in privilege. I'm getting closer, Sterling, Pam said, her voice taut with urgency. And I think I'm about to step on some very dangerous toes. That's why I'm calling you. I need someone who's willing to go toe-to-toe with these people, no matter who they are. Sterling chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. You know me, Bondi. I don't back down. But you're playing with fire. This isn't just about illegal weed. This feels like something much bigger, something with deeper roots. He was right. The feeling in her gut, the disquiet in her office, the hushed whispers from her contacts, it all pointed to a conspiracy far more complex and sinister than a simple bribery scheme. I need the files on Epstein, Sterling, Pam said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Specifically, anything related to his financial dealings and any known associates who might have had interests in Florida's burgeoning industries. The silence on the other end was even longer this time. It stretched, thin and brittle, across the miles. Pam held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knew she was asking for something that would put her squarely in the crosshairs of some of the most powerful and dangerous people in the country. But the alternative, letting this rot fester, was unthinkable. Finally, Sterling's voice returned, laced with a grim finality. Bondi, you're asking for trouble, and you're asking for things that are heavily classified, heavily guarded. This goes beyond my clearance, beyond your jurisdiction. I'm the Attorney General of Florida, Sterling, Pam countered, her voice unwavering. And if this corruption is bleeding into my state, it falls under my jurisdiction. You know I play by the rules, but I also know when the rules are being twisted and broken by those who think they're untouchable. This isn't about playing by the rules, Bondi. This is about survival, Sterling warned. These people don't play fair. They don't care about justice. They care about power. Then let's make them care about consequences, Pam said, a steely resolve hardening her gaze. The sun outside had begun its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. But inside Pam Bondi's office, a different kind of storm was brewing, a storm of truth and retribution, and it was only just beginning. The next day, Sarah presented Pam with a new development, delivered via a secure, encrypted channel. It was a single, unsigned email containing a link to a public cloud storage account. The subject line was chillingly simple, a heads up. Hesitantly, Pam clicked the link. The account contained a trove of documents, seemingly unrelated at first glance. A series of encrypted communication logs, detailed transaction histories from untraceable cryptocurrencies, and, most disturbingly, a set of high-resolution photographs. The photographs were stark. They depicted clandestine meetings, hushed conversations in dimly lit rooms, and individuals whose faces were instantly recognizable to anyone who followed national politics and finance. Men and women of immense influence, caught in compromising positions. And in several of the images, a shadowy figure, his face obscured, was meeting with them. "Who is this man?" Pam asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah, her face pale, scrolled through the images. I don't know, AG, but look at the dates on these communications. They predate the cannabis legalization vote by months, and the conversations, they're about facilitating access, streamlining approvals, and ensuring favorable outcomes. Pam felt a cold dread creep into her bones. The individuals in the photographs were not small-time operators. They were titans of industry, political heavyweights, people who shaped policy and influenced elections. And they were meeting with a ghost, a shadowy facilitator who seemed to be orchestrating a complex game of influence. Then Pam noticed something else. Tucked away in the corner of one of the transaction logs was a reference to a specific offshore account, an account that had been flagged in the initial stages of Project Nightingale. And the recipient of a significant, untraceable transfer? A shell corporation that had been a key player in securing one of the first lucrative medical cannabis licenses in Florida. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a horrifying mosaic of corruption. The question was, who was the architect of this scheme? And how deep did the rot go? "This is beyond anything we anticipated, Sarah," Pam said, her voice tight. "This isn't just about one industry. This is about a coordinated effort to subvert the democratic process for personal gain." Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with alarm. "AG, if this gets out, if these people are exposed, the fallout could be catastrophic. These are not people who will go down quietly." Pam met her gaze, her own eyes blazing with a newfound determination. "That's why we have to be meticulous. We have to be careful. We have to gather irrefutable evidence, proof that cannot be denied." She picked up her phone again, her fingers hovering over Sterling's contact. The thought of the Friday deadlines, the pressure they represented, suddenly felt insignificant. This was no longer about meeting a deadline. It was about uncovering a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of their state. "I need to have a more in-depth conversation with Agent Sterling," Pam said, her voice firm. "And I need to know what else he might be withholding." The ghost in the machine, the shadowy figure orchestrating the illicit dealings, remained an enigma. But Pam Bondi was no longer willing to let the darkness prevail. The fight had begun, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would be a battle for the soul of Florida. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. The pressure was mounting, not just from the approaching deadlines, but from the overwhelming realization that the truth, when it finally broke, would shake the political landscape to its core. She just hoped she was prepared for the seismic impact. The air in Pam Bondi's Tallahassee office was thick with a pre-dawn tension that had become her unwelcome companion. Outside, the Florida sun was just beginning to paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the grim reality that had descended upon her. The previous Friday, the dual shocks had hit. The unexpected court filings related to the cannabis industry and the even more seismic revelation of previously sealed Epstein documents, both landing with the force of a political thunderclap. The initial, almost disbelieving silence had quickly morphed into a cacophony of accusations and demands. She sat at her polished mahogany desk, the faint scent of lemon polish unable to mask the acrid odor of political warfare. Her usually immaculate silver hair was slightly mussed, a testament to the restless nights spent poring over documents, seeking answers that seemed to evaporate like mist. Across from her, her chief of staff, David Chen, a man usually brimming with unflappable calm, looked visibly drained. His eyes, normally sharp and analytical, were now shadowed with concern. "Pam, the calls haven't stopped," David said, his voice a low, urgent rumble. "The Senate Judiciary Committee is formally requesting an oversight hearing." "That's unprecedented in this context. They want you to testify next week, and the media storm is only intensifying. The headlines today are brutal. Bondi under fire, Justice Department scrutiny over cannabis deal, and then, of course, the Epstein angle is, it's radioactive. Pam steepled her fingers, her gaze fixed on a framed photograph of her family. Her strength, her resilience, was a carefully cultivated thing, forged in the crucible of public service and personal loss. But this felt different. It wasn't just a political attack, it felt like an orchestrated dismantling. Radioactive is an understatement, David, she replied, her voice tight. These weren't just random files, they were sealed for a reason. And the timing, the cannabis lawsuit was already a ticking time bomb. Now this, it feels like someone knew, someone was waiting. The cannabis lawsuit, a seemingly innocuous class action suit challenging the state's medical marijuana licensing process, a process she, as Attorney General, had defended. But a leaked internal memo, unearthed and amplified by investigative journalists, suggested a potential conflict of interest, a whisper of a quid pro quo involving a campaign donation. It was a narrative that the opposition had seized upon with glee, a perfectly crafted story of corruption and deceit. Then came the Epstein files. These were the truly devastating part. A treasure trove of documents related to the disgraced financier's sex trafficking ring, documents that had been subject to strict sealing orders. Now, inexplicably, portions of them had surfaced, implicating high-profile individuals, including, allegedly, people with whom Pam Bondi's office had interacted in a professional capacity. The whispers of impropriety, of potential cover-ups, were deafening. The cannabis memo, David continued, scrolling through his tablet, it's being framed as a smoking gun. They're alleging you steered favorable treatment to a company whose executives were major donors. The timing of the leak, right before the Epstein documents dropped, it's too coincidental, Pam. Pam sighed, running a hand over her forehead. Coincidence is a luxury we can't afford to believe in right now, David. Who benefits from this? Who stands to gain from my downfall? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. There were always political rivals, those eager to fill her shoes. But this felt deeper, more calculated. It felt like an attack from within, or from someone who had intimate knowledge of her office's operations. Scene 1, The Whispers in the Chamber. The following day, the atmosphere in the Florida Senate chamber was charged with anticipation. The bipartisan committee hearing, ostensibly about oversight of the Attorney General's office, felt more like a trial by media. Senator Anya Sharma, a sharp, ambitious Democrat who had made a name for herself by championing consumer protection and prosecuting corporate malfeasance, led the questioning. Her demeanor was cool, her questions precise, designed to chip away at Bondi's defenses with surgical accuracy. Attorney General Bondi, Senator Sharma began, her voice amplified by the microphone, can you explain the perceived conflict of interest in your office's handling of the medical marijuana licensing case, particularly concerning the donations received by your campaign from individuals associated with the GrowCo Corporation? Pam, seated at the witness table, her posture erect, met Sharma's gaze. She wore a navy blue suit, a picture of controlled composure. Senator Sharma, my office has always acted with the utmost integrity. The licensing process was governed by established state law, and any campaign contributions were fully disclosed and within legal limits. Furthermore, I recused myself from any decision-making process that could have been perceived as a conflict. This is a manufactured controversy designed to distract from the vital work my office performs for the people of Florida. The exchange was broadcast live, its every inflection analyzed by a legion of political commentators. The camera zoomed in on Bondi's face, searching for any flicker of unease. Sharma pressed on, introducing the leaked memo, its contents splashed across screens for all to see. This memo, Attorney General, Sharma said, holding up a document, suggests a direct communication between your office and GrowCo representatives discussing licensing specifics after a significant donation. How do you reconcile this with your claim of recusal? Pam's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The memo was an internal communication, meant to facilitate departmental processes, not a concession to a donor. But the narrative had already been written. That memo, Senator, was part of standard departmental procedure, ensuring efficient communication regarding an evolving legal landscape. It does not represent any preferential treatment or undue influence. The media, in conjunction with certain political actors, is misrepresenting the facts to create a false impression. Across the aisle, Senator John Vance, a seasoned Republican known for his fierce loyalty to the party and his quiet effectiveness, sat impassively. He offered no interjections, no visible support. His silence was a subtle, but powerful, statement. It suggested a wavering of Republican solidarity, a sign that even within her own party, Bondi was being isolated. The Epstein files were the next weapon. Sharma, with a calculated pause, shifted gears. Attorney General, let us turn our attention to the recently unsealed documents pertaining to Jeffrey Epstein. Your office, as you know, was involved in certain aspects of the investigation and settlement of related cases. Can you confirm whether your office was aware of any inadvertent destruction or suppression of evidence related to these files? The question landed like a bombshell. The implication was clear. Was Bondi's office complicit in hiding evidence related to Epstein's crimes? The room buzzed. Pam felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This was beyond politics. This was about grave accusations of covering up child exploitation. Senator Sharma, Pam said, her voice steady but carrying a new edge of steel, my office has a proud record of fighting for victims and upholding the law. We cooperated fully with federal authorities on the Epstein investigation, and any suggestion of wrongdoing or suppression of evidence by my office is a baseless and malicious fabrication. She knew, however, that the mere insinuation was enough to inflict damage. The seeds of doubt were being sown, and the fertile ground of public opinion was ready to receive them. Scene 2. The Betrayal and the Leak. The aftermath of the Senate hearing was a whirlwind. The media, fueled by Sharma's pointed questions and Vance's silent disapproval, painted a picture of an embattled attorney general on the ropes. The narrative was inescapable. Bondi was either incompetent, corrupt, or both. Pam retreated to her office, the pressure mounting with every passing hour. David had managed to track down the source of the cannabis memo leak. It wasn't an external hack, it was an internal betrayal. Pam, it was Mark Jenkins, David said, his voice laced with disbelief. Jenkins was a senior aide in her office, someone Pam had trusted implicitly, a staunch conservative who had been with her for years. Pam recoiled as if struck. Mark, that's impossible. He's been loyal. Apparently not, David said grimly, sliding a printout across the desk. It was a series of encrypted messages, meticulously pieced together by their cybersecurity team, showing Jenkins communicating with a known opposition researcher, a man with deep ties to the Democratic Party's National Committee. The messages detailed the timing and content of the memo, and even provided advice on how to frame its release to maximize damage. He was disgruntled, David explained, his eyes scanning the messages. Felt he wasn't getting the recognition he deserved. He was approached, offered, incentives. Not just money, Pam, promises of future political appointments, of influence. The betrayal cut deeper than any political attack. It was personal. It was a violation of trust that shook her to her core. Incentives, Pam repeated, the word tasting like ash. He sold me out for a pat on the head and a future job. He knew what this would do. The Epstein documents, however, were a more complex puzzle. The leak wasn't directly traceable to Jenkins. This suggested a different, perhaps more sophisticated player. The Epstein files. We think the leak came from a federal courthouse source, David said, his brow furrowed. Someone with access to sealed dockets. The timing is too precise, too coordinated with the cannabis leak. It's like a pincer movement. Pam looked out the window, the city lights twinkling like distant, indifferent stars. It's not just about discrediting me, David. It's about paralyzing the office. If the public loses faith, if the legal processes are undermined, then the criminals win. She decided to take a more direct approach. She contacted a trusted contact within the Department of Justice, a former colleague who owed her a significant favor. She needed to understand the scope of the Epstein document leak and who within the federal government might be responsible. "They're not cooperating," Pam's contact reported back a few days later, his voice tight with frustration. "It's like hitting a brick wall. There's a palpable lack of transparency from certain agencies. They're stonewalling. And the pressure from above, it's immense. Whoever is behind this has serious influence in Washington." The more she dug, the more she realized how interconnected these attacks were. The cannabis memo, designed to create a narrative of local corruption, was a smokescreen. The Epstein files, with their far-reaching implications, were the real payload, designed to shatter her credibility on a national level. "This is bigger than Florida, isn't it?" Pam mused, more to herself than to David. "This is about national figures, about power plays at the highest levels." David nodded, his face grim. "And you're caught in the middle, Pam. The longer this goes on, the more likely it is that the public will believe the narrative, regardless of the truth. We need to fight back, but we need proof. And right now, it feels like we're losing ground by the minute." The psychological cliffhanger was the gnawing uncertainty. Who was the architect of this elaborate scheme? What was their ultimate goal? And how deep did the rot truly go? Pam Bondi, the target, felt the pressure intensifying, the walls closing in, but a flicker of defiance, a hardened resolve, began to ignite within her. She was not going down without a fight. The unraveling thread had been pulled, but she was determined to reweave it into a tapestry of truth, no matter how tangled and dangerous the process became. Scene 3. The public spectacle and the seed of doubt. The political drama unfolded on cable news channels like a Greek tragedy, complete with damning accusations and public scrutiny. Pam Bondi, the stoic protagonist, was now a recurring character in a nightly spectacle of political theater. One evening, watching a particularly aggressive segment on a cable news channel, Pam felt a surge of anger. The host, a bombastic commentator with a penchant for sensationalism, was gleefully dissecting the alleged conflicts of interest. "And what about the Epstein documents, folks?" the host boomed, his face inches from the camera. It's been 39 seconds since the AG's office released a statement denying any wrongdoing, and yet the questions linger. Were they really unaware of what was being filed? Or were they playing a game of willful ignorance? The people of Florida deserve answers, not platitudes. 39 seconds. The specific mention of the insignificant time frame felt deliberate, a calculated jab designed to highlight the perceived inaction and evasion. It was a subtle, yet potent, psychological warfare. "They're trying to break me," Pam murmured, turning off the television. "They want me to crack under the pressure, to resign in disgrace." David entered the room, holding a fresh stack of papers. "Pam, the opposition is now directly linking the cannabis settlement to campaign finance violations, and they're subtly suggesting that your office knew about the Epstein connections of certain individuals who benefited from those settlements." This was the escalation. The two seemingly separate issues were being woven together into a single, damning narrative of corruption. The cannabis lawsuit, a state-level issue, was being amplified and connected to the national scandal of Jeffrey Epstein. "They're creating a narrative of guilt by association," Pam said, her voice tight with frustration. "They're implying that my office was either complicit or criminally negligent. This is not about justice. It's about a coordinated smear campaign designed to undermine my entire career." The pressure to retaliate was immense. Her legal team was pushing for aggressive countermeasures, for public denouncements of the leaks and the accusations. But Pam knew that a direct, emotional outburst would only play into their hands. She needed to remain calm, to appear in control, even as the storm raged around her. She decided on a strategic counteroffensive. Instead of directly refuting every accusation, she would focus on exposing the machinations behind the leaks. Her office began discreetly gathering evidence of the opposition researchers' communications with Jenkins, meticulously building a case for a betrayal from within and a coordinated attack from outside. Meanwhile, the Epstein files continued to cast a long shadow. The leaked documents, while not directly implicating Bondi, contained the names of powerful individuals, some of whom had connections to the political sphere. The broader implications of these files were far-reaching. and any association with them, even tangential, was becoming toxic. Pam received a call from a former colleague, a high-ranking official in the Department of Justice. He was clearly troubled. "Pam, I can't say much, but the pressure from above to suppress certain aspects of the Epstein document investigation is significant. There are powerful people who have a lot to lose. Be careful who you trust. This is bigger than you think." The mysterious hooks were deepening. The suggestion of federal complicity in suppressing information about Epstein's network was chilling. It implied that the leak wasn't just an opportunistic political hit, but a calculated move to either expose corruption or perhaps to control the narrative by strategically releasing damaging information. The emotional escalation was palpable. Pam felt the weight of the accusations, the betrayal of trust, and the looming threat of a powerful, unseen enemy. But with each setback, a steely resolve hardened within her. She began to see the pattern, the coordinated effort to dismantle her reputation. The 39-second response, the rapid succession of leaks, the bipartisan outrage. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan. The cliffhanger was the growing realization that this wasn't just a fight for her political survival, but a battle for the integrity of the legal system itself. The threads of the cannabis deal and the Epstein scandal were being woven together, and Pam Bondi was at the center of a conspiracy that threatened to engulf her, and potentially many others. The unraveling thread, she suspected, was leading to a far more sinister truth than anyone was yet willing to admit. The question was, could she pull it out without being ensnared herself? The stage was set for a reckoning. The humid Florida air, usually a comforting embrace, felt suffocating. Pam Bondi, sitting in the sterile conference room at the Attorney General's office, felt a cold dread seep into her bones. The Friday deadlines, not just one, but two, separated by a mere 39 seconds, had morphed from a bureaucratic hurdle into a looming storm cloud. The files, initially treated as sensitive but manageable, had become infernos, the sparks of which were igniting bipartisan outrage across the nation. She'd been awake for 48 hours, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the gnawing realization that she'd been played. The initial pushback, the veiled threats, the carefully orchestrated leaks, it all pointed to a coordinated attack, far beyond the usual political sparring. The names whispered in hushed tones, the specter of Jeffrey Epstein's network, the burgeoning cannabis industry, these weren't isolated incidents. They were threads woven into a tapestry of corruption, and she, Pam Bondi, was now tangled in its most dangerous knots. Her aide, a young woman named Sarah, her usual crisp demeanor frayed at the edges, stood by the window, her back to Pam. Sarah had been the one to bring her the first damning file. A discreet envelope slipped under her door late on a Thursday night. Now, Sarah's silence was more deafening than any accusation. "They're calling for my head, Sarah," Pam said, her voice raspy. "The senators, the columnists, even some of our own party are distancing themselves. They're saying I was negligent, complicit." The words tasted like ash. Sarah finally turned, her eyes red-rimmed. "They're lying, Pam. You weren't complicit, you were targeted." "Targeted for what? For doing my job? For trying to uphold the law in a state drowning in shadows?" Pam's frustration was a volatile current, threatening to break free. She slammed her hand on the polished table, the sound echoing in the silence. "That cannabis deal, it was clean. We followed protocol. And the Epstein files, we were reviewing them. We were about to act." "But they wanted you to act differently, didn't they?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "They wanted you to bury it, or worse, to use it." Pam closed her eyes, picturing the faces, the polished smiles of lobbyists, the glint of greed in their eyes, the subtle pressure applied with surgical precision. She remembered the frantic calls, the whispered warnings, the sudden, inexplicable shifts in the political landscape. And then, the bombshell, the press conference, timed to coincide with the submission of those two critical deadlines, where carefully selected evidence was presented, twisting her actions into something nefarious. The timing, Sarah, 39 seconds. It was too perfect. It was designed to make me look indecisive, incompetent. A politician caught between a rock and a hard place, forced to make a desperate choice, and they made sure the choice they wanted me to make looked bad no matter what. Sarah walked over to the table, her hands trembling as she held up a printed article. This is from the Capitol Watchdog. They're claiming you received inducements to delay action on both fronts. Pam snatched the paper. The accusations were venomous, devoid of nuance, painted with broad strokes of deceit. Inducements? I've spent my career fighting for justice, and now I'm being painted as some kind of criminal? For what? For trying to navigate a minefield that was deliberately laid out for me? The YouTube channel, the Capitol Watchdog, had become a lightning rod for the outrage. Its videos, expertly edited with dramatic music and inflammatory headlines, had gone viral within hours of the press conference. The narrator, a disembodied voice with an unnerving cadence, had a knack for twisting facts, for creating narratives of corruption out of thin air. Pam knew the channel was funded by shadowy figures, powerful individuals who stood to lose everything if her investigations into the cannabis industry and the Epstein network had ever seen the light of day. They've created a narrative, Pam, Sarah said, her voice firming. A narrative of a compromised attorney general, and that narrative is winning. The psychological cliffhanger wasn't in the unknown, but in the horrifying certainty of what had already happened. The betrayal cut deep. She had trusted some of the same people who were now calling for her downfall. Lawyers she'd consulted, political allies who'd promised support, all had vanished like smoke in the wind, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. What do we have, Sarah? What's our defense? Pam's voice was a low growl, the attacker's initial aggression, the veiled threats and subtle manipulations, now echoing back, amplified by the public's fury. She felt the pressure, the expectation to collapse, to cower, to admit defeat. But a flicker of defiance ignited within her. She wouldn't let them break her. "We have the truth, Pam," Sarah said, her gaze unwavering. "We have your records. We have the internal memos. We have the fact that you were investigating. The 39-second window was a manufactured crisis, designed to push you into a corner where any action would be damning. But it wasn't a decision born of corruption. It was a decision born of impossible circumstances created by others." The emotional escalation was palpable. Pam's initial shock and disbelief had morphed into a burning anger, and now a steely resolve. She wouldn't be the victim in this story. She would be the protagonist, fighting for her reputation, for the integrity of her office. And the Epstein files? They're spinning that too, making it sound like I've been sitting on evidence for years, protecting the powerful. Sarah nodded grimly. They're painting you as complicit with them, with their network. It's the most damaging accusation. The Capitol Watchdog video is relentless, showing snippets of your past speeches about fighting child exploitation, juxtaposed with their evidence of your supposed inaction. It's sickening. Pam's mind raced. The Epstein files were a Pandora's box, filled with accusations that reached into the highest echelons of power. The cannabis industry, a burgeoning multi-billion-dollar market, was ripe for exploitation. Someone had seen an opportunity to use her office, to manipulate her carefully constructed career to their own advantage. "Who benefits most from this, Sarah?" Pam asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The network, Pam. The same people who benefited from Epstein's silence, and the large cannabis corporations who wanted to stifle competition and control the market. They saw you as a threat, or worse, a pawn they could manipulate." The mystery hook was no longer about what was in the files, but about who had orchestrated this entire charade. The seemingly disparate deadlines, the aggressive media campaign, the carefully leaked documents, it all pointed to a master puppeteer. "We need to go public, Sarah, not with excuses, but with the truth. We need to expose the manipulation, the fabrication." Pam stood up, her movements deliberate and strong. The attacker, initially so confident in their ability to expose and collapse her, was about to face a different kind of exposure. But the Capitol Watchdog has already released so much. The narrative is already set. People are already believing it. Sarah's voice was laced with doubt. "Narratives can be rewritten," Pam declared, her eyes blazing. especially when the truth is on your side. We'll hold a press conference. We'll present our own evidence. We'll show them how they tried to frame me. The days that followed were a blur of frantic activity. Pam and Sarah, along with a small, loyal team, worked around the clock. They meticulously compiled every relevant document, every memo, every communication. They contacted trusted journalists, not those who had been swayed by the Capitol watchdog, but those known for their integrity. The press conference was scheduled for a Monday morning, a direct challenge to the narrative that had been built over the weekend. The room was packed, a sea of flashing cameras and expectant faces. The air crackled with tension. Pam Bondi walked to the podium, not with the hesitant gait of someone on the defensive, but with the confident stride of someone who had nothing to hide. Sarah stood to her side, a silent pillar of support. "Good morning," Pam began, her voice clear and strong. "For the past few days, my office has been the subject of a coordinated and malicious attack. False accusations have been leveled against me, twisting my actions and my intentions into something they are not." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "These attacks are not about my integrity. They are about silencing an investigation. They are about protecting powerful individuals who have profited from darkness and deceit." With a subtle nod to Sarah, Pam began to present her case. She laid out the timeline, detailing the pressure she had faced regarding the cannabis industry, the careful steps she had taken, and the manufactured crisis that had been created to force her hand. She produced internal memos showing her efforts to investigate and regulate the industry, not to obstruct it. Then she moved on to the Epstein files. "The Jeffrey Epstein case is one of the most sensitive and complex investigations my office has ever undertaken," Pam stated, her voice hardening. "We were in the process of reviewing the files, of building a case when these leaks began. Leaks designed to paint me as someone who was complicit in his crimes rather than someone determined to expose them." Sarah projected documents onto a screen behind Pam. Emails, internal reports, evidence of the steps Pam's office had taken to cooperate with federal authorities. They showed a pattern of diligent work, not of obstruction. "The 39 seconds that have been so widely reported were not a sign of indecision," Pam declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "They were a calculated maneuver by those who wished to control the narrative, a tactic to make me appear weak and compromised, thereby discrediting any future action I might take." The room was silent, the journalists scribbling furiously. The attack that had been designed to expose and collapse Pam Bondi was now backfiring, exposing the attackers themselves. The source of these attacks, the Capitol watchdog, is a platform for misinformation funded by individuals with a vested interest in suppressing the truth, Pam continued. "They have used fabricated evidence and inflammatory rhetoric to create a false narrative. Today, I present you with the facts. I present you with the truth." The following days were a whirlwind. The tide began to turn. The meticulous presentation of evidence by Pam's office, coupled with the growing suspicion about the funding and motives of the Capitol watchdog, began to chip away at the manufactured narrative. Trusted news outlets, initially hesitant, began to investigate Pam's claims. The attacker, the shadowy force that had orchestrated the campaign, began to unravel. Investigations into the funding of the Capitol watchdog revealed direct links to individuals and corporations implicated in the Epstein network and the cannabis industry. Arrests began to be made, not of Pam Bondi, but of those who had sought to bring her down. The aggressive posture of the attackers had left them exposed. Their carefully constructed facade of righteousness crumbled under the weight of their own deceit. The Capitol watchdog, once a formidable voice, became a pariah, its credibility shattered. Pam Bondi, once targeted and besieged, was vindicated. The bipartisan outrage that had threatened to engulf her now shifted. A portion of it directed at those who had attempted to manipulate the justice system for their own gain. Senators who had previously called for her resignation now issued statements of support, acknowledging the political machinations at play. Back in her office, the air felt lighter. The suffocating humidity had dissipated, replaced by a quiet calm. Sarah, her eyes no longer red-rimmed with worry, but bright with triumph, handed Pam a cup of actual hot coffee. "They collapsed, Pam," Sarah said, a smile finally gracing her lips. "They truly collapsed." Pam took a sip, the warmth spreading through her. They underestimated the resilience of truth, Sarah, and they underestimated my own. She looked out the window, the Florida sun casting long shadows. The battle had been brutal, the stakes impossibly high. She had faced down powerful enemies, navigated treacherous political currents, and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger. This wasn't just about Miyai, Pam mused, her voice reflective. It was about the integrity of the justice system. It was about ensuring that no one, no matter how powerful, can manipulate the law to their own advantage. The experience had left scars, a lingering wariness, but it had also forged a new resolve. She had seen firsthand how easily truth could be twisted, how quickly reputations could be destroyed, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the fight for justice was a constant, ongoing struggle. The files, both Cannabis and Epstein, would continue to demand her attention, but now she would face them with the hard-won wisdom of her own reckoning. The collapse of her attackers had paved the way for her vindication, and in doing so, had reaffirmed her commitment to the pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. The political drama had played out, not with a simple victory, but with a profound understanding of the battles yet to come.